So on October 13, 2025, the state of California passed a bill. I believe it's titled AB 1043. AB 1043, if I got that correct. So on October 13, 2025, California passed a law that requires operating systems like Windows, Mac, iPhone, Android, and dare I say it, Linux, to mandatory age verify people who use those operating systems. When you buy a new computer, in this case, you say you went to Best Buy and you bought a brand new computer, when you open it up, when you open that computer up, you will be required to tell Microsoft or Apple what is your age. It will be required in law to tell Microsoft or Apple what is your age, so that if you are 18 years old or older, you are allowed to set up the computer. If you are 17 years old or younger, you are not allowed to set up your own computer. Now, everything that I'm talking about in this conversation is not legal advice. That's my disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. I am not versed in law. And I am talking about this from the standpoint of a layperson, someone who has an interest in this topic. So this is not legal advice either for or against age verification. This is merely a conversation that needs to be had right now so that we understand how events are unfolding in the future. And so I am going to follow a structure in this conversation. I had Claude Pro and DeepSeek both look at this in a very detailed way. And leading up to this, I had produced a 60-page document that I read myself, a 60-page document with the help of both DeepSeek and Claude on how to better master the use of AI. So I've taken my AI prompting skills to a whole different level that I will talk about in a future video. But suffice it to say, I have achieved a level of dialogue with AI that allows me to get better answers. Now, this document is fresh. I just generated it, so I haven't gone over it in detail, but I'm familiar with the questions that I asked that led to this. So this is going to be not a scripted conversation, but it will be organic. So let's look at this as first, we see both sides, right? For and against. Let's look at against. The case against mandatory age verification. So the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says that, or at least implies that from a certain legal point of view, that mandatory age verification is just like someone holding back your free speech ahead of time. It is basically setting you up so that you censor yourself, that you are not able to fully be yourself and be free in the way that you talk, speak, or present yourself to society. To include, in this case, to present yourself anonymously. So before any user, adult or minor, may access constitutionally protected expression, they must first submit to an identity verification process, right? So the Supreme Court's foundational holding in Reno versus the ACLU in 1997 established that the internet is entitled to the highest level of First Amendment protection. And if Reno is the same person that I'm talking about, is that Janet Reno from Arizona, or is this Reno, Nevada? I have no idea. But whether it is Janet Reno from Arizona or Reno, Nevada, the what came out of that is the internet is just like print media, just like newspapers, just like somebody typing up a flyer and putting it on college campuses, putting it on billboards in grocery stores, and being able to distribute their ideas anonymously, whether in protest to something that's going on in society or in favor or advocacy for something that is going on in society. So prior to the internet, people have been able to go out and put out flyers and put out media of various kinds, print media, and express themselves without prosecution or persecution. So that is the fundamental value, you would say, has been established in the First Amendment. We have to remind ourselves at this point that the First Amendment is something that, we talk about so much that it loses its meaning, right? But I was a very good civics student, right? I come from that old school time where we just really studied these things. There was a king in Britain. Today, we call this the United Kingdom, the UK, where they have laws against people that express themselves. We as a country here, right, in general, because some of us didn't fight, but we as a country, we had a situation where the king in England could tell the citizens of Britain and the UK what they could and could not say, and that extended to the United States. So part of what established the United States as it has existed for over 200 years is the ability, that's why they call it Amendment Number 1, is the ability to express yourselves without pressure or coercion from a higher governmental authority. In this case, a monarchy, right? We fought a whole war over that. An entire war just so people can express themselves freely. So that's what this means, is that part of the use of a computer for people who are not in business, but to some extent people who are in business, because remember, there was a law that was passed about 20 some odd years ago that companies are people too. But the thing of it is that for the majority of us as citizens, right, unless you're a convicted felon, you have the right to use equipment like a computer where you can generate content and information and the like freely and without restriction from the government based on the template established in the U.S. Constitution as guidance for how all the other laws in the United States of America would be formed at the state level. The state laws, there is a thing called state rights, but the state laws are to be in general modeled after federal law, which is based on, presumably, the U.S. Constitution. So age verification requirements impose a gatekeeping function that is structurally indistinguishable from the licensing regimes the First Amendment was designed to prohibit. Even where the underlying content may not itself be constitutionally protected for minors, the verification mechanism necessarily burdens the rights of adults to access lawful content anonymously, a right the court has recognized as integral to free expression since a Talley versus California and McIntyre versus Ohio Elections Commission's rulings in 1960 and 1995, respectively. The chilling effect of age verification is not hypothetical. Empirical evidence from jurisdictions that have implemented age verification for adult content sites shows significant declines in traffic, not because minors are being effectively screened, but because adults who are unwilling to surrender personal identification documents simply abandon the sites. In Brown versus Entertainment Merchants Association in 2011, the court struck down California's attempt to restrict the sale of violent video games to minors, holding that the state had not demonstrated a compelling interest sufficient to justify content-based restriction and that less restrictive alternatives existed. Keep in mind, these court rulings are taking a page from the First Amendment. That's the running theme here, right? That's why people in some corners of the internet are outraged about this proposal to age verify. Countries around the world may do whatever they want to do. Brazil has said you have until March 17, the country of Brazil said you have until March 17 to comply with Brazil's age verification laws, right? The UK, the United Kingdom, has its own ID verification thing going on. But we're talking about the United States. As sovereign citizens of the United States, we have a tradition in this country, at least, to take our cues, to take a page from the Constitution. So, Fourth Amendment, privacy and surveillance architecture. Age verification systems necessarily create centralized or distributed databases linking individual identity to content access patterns. So, following Carpenter versus United States in 2018, the court recognized that digital age surveillance capabilities can intrude, and keyword is can, but we know it will intrude on reasonable expectations of privacy in ways that require Fourth Amendment scrutiny. So, what is the Fourth Amendment, right? Now, granted, I was a good civic student, and then somewhere in 2015-ish, whatever, I don't know, it might have been before that, I actually purchased a copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and I spent some time reading it. I had reasons for that, but from what I remember, right, the Fourth Amendment protects you from unlawful search and seizure, right? There is a such thing as lawful search and seizure, right? There are laws that say, well, if you are suspected of committing a crime, or it is known for sure you are committing a crime, there are circumstances where your stuff will be taken, you will be taken, and even before that, in some cases, your house, your bags, whatever, it will be searched, right? So that goes back to the whole British monarchy thing I was talking about earlier, where, even before you come to America and you go back in the history of England, right? Go back to the first King George. What year was that? Was that 1066? Somewhere in that ballpark. So go back to the first kings of England. The first kings of England were warlords, and those warlords would actually go and take your stuff, search your stuff, take your stuff. As monarchy became more outwardly civilized and refined and sophisticated, that impetus to search and take your stuff never went away. And it made its way here to the United States. And again, a whole war was fought against that. Because whenever, what they would call redcoats or British troops at that time that was in the original 13 colonies, whenever they wanted to say, hey, I'm going to come over and I'm just going to, you have a group of British troops. They say, hey, we're just going to come into your house. You're going to feed us. You're going to let us have a place to sleep because we just need to camp out here for a minute. So instead of camping outside, we're going to camp in your house. And we have the legal right to do that. We're going to take over your stuff temporarily. So that was one situation. The other situation is where evidence was not established that you were a criminal or that you were in violation of the law or that you did something wrong. There was no evidence. You were simply accused, whether the accusations had any basis in fact, or somebody just had something against you. If that person that was against you was a government official, they would just come after you, right? And they could search your stuff, take your stuff. So that was common practice from British authorities back in the day, back in the 18th century, the 17th centuries, and further back. So anyway, so a whole war was fought over that, right? The Revolutionary War. So anyway, age verification mandates effectively requires either the government or its private sector deputized agents collect, store, and process identity documents, driver's license, passports, biometric data in connection with specific content access requests. The potential for data breaches. So somebody hacks into a database that has all this age and ID verification information. Somebody hacks into that database and gets your identity that way. Well, there's no protections for you when that happens. All right. And government subpoena of verification records. What happens to your right to privacy? Your right to challenge a warrant, your right to challenge, that civil imposition under various conditions. Well, that right goes away because you don't even need to be notified. They can go to the company that has this information or to the database that has this information. And we also have the issue of secondary commercial exploitation of identity data, and it creates a surveillance architecture that would have been unimaginable to the framers of the U.S. Constitution. And that the Fourth Amendment's warrant and probable cause requirements were designed to prevent. So, due process and vagueness. Right, we could just keep going on and on and on about how there are so many court cases in the United States that back up a citizen's right to privacy and freedom of expression, that age verification laws and digital ID laws and suggestions go against. We're talking about the United States, right? We're not really talking about what people do in other countries. We're talking about the tradition and what people have been trained on in public and private school systems in the United States for the last 200 plus years, that you have a First Amendment, you have a Fourth Amendment, and you have a right to privacy. So, philosophical objections, right? John Stuart Mill, he is a philosopher that says that the sole legitimate ground for restricting individual liberty, the sole legitimate ground for restricting individual liberty is the prevention of harm to others. Applied to age verification, the principle cuts both ways. While children may be harmed by premature exposure to certain content, The Mill framework demands that we ask whether age verification itself causes harm to privacy, to autonomy, to the information ecosystem, and whether less intrusive means exist to achieve the protective goal, right? So there has not been a public debate discussion about what are the range of options to protect children and minors. Now we see the what do you call that? The assumption is that by having it in a computer operating system, which itself is subject to be hacked, to be manipulated, where children could lie about their age and all kinds of things, right? That is not the most effective mechanism that we have in order to achieve these objectives of protecting children and minors. So the Millian analysis strongly disfavors blanket age verification mandates. The harm to children from online content is real, contested in its severity by researchers, and mediated by parental supervision, right? So, the parents, right, can simply decide how to raise their children and to take away. Bill Gates did not even allow his children to even use a computer most of the time. So that's the model, right? Okay, well, you're just not going to have access to a computer. I'm not going to buy you one and blah, 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 right? Not to sit and say, okay, when you set up a computer, you got to do all this stuff that from a technical standpoint will, at the end of the day, be rendered meaningless by a variety of other factors. So, educational intervention is key, right? So how we educate and how we supervise is the age-old advice, right? The harm from a universal surveillance and identification regime is concrete, measurable, and falls on every user of the internet regardless of age. So Locke, property and the limits of the social contract. So I believe the guy's name is John Locke. I'm not sure, but the Lockean tradition emphasizes that government authority is derived from the consent of the governed and is limited to the protection of natural rights, life, liberty, and property. And as Benjamin Franklin said, those that would, give up their liberty for temporary security doesn't deserve either, right? And so the extension of government regulatory power to mandate that private companies build and operate identity verification systems represents an expansion of the social contract that John Locke would view with deep suspicion. The obligation to verify age is, in effect, a commandeering, a taking of private infrastructure for state purposes, right? It's all about the money. A concern that resonates with the Supreme Court's anti-commandeering doctrine under the 10th Amendment. And Kantian concerns Immanuel Kant, right? Kantian ethics supports the protection of children as categorical moral agents deserving of respect. It also prohibits treating rational adults as mere means to the state's regulatory ends, right? Do the people have actual respect, or are they seen as numbers and pawns and pieces in a game and a system? And so that really gets to the heart of it in many respects. So a universal age verification mandate presumes that every user is a potential rule violator until they prove otherwise. An inversion of the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, right? And to require every adult to affirmatively demonstrate their age before accessing lawful content is to treat the citizens as suspects rather than sovereign individuals. So, I have been writing software code. I first wrote software code in the 90s, and I did it professionally for about 20 years, and I've been exposed and working with computers for approximately 35 years. So, and I still write code as recently as last month. So, over 25 years of writing software code. Software engineering is something that I am into and that I understand, right? And so let's look at the practical and technical objections, right? No verification system is both effective or respects your rights. The engineering community has not yet developed an age verification technology that that satisfies three necessary conditions. Effective exclusion of minors. Okay, so the person that's 17 years or older says they're 17 years of older. Do you nuke the computer? Do you nuke the tablet? Do you run a kill switch on the phone? Right? Many phones don't even have multiple accounts, right? Or an easy way to switch multiple accounts. So if mom or dad lets the kid use the phone, is that a violation of this law, right? There's so many unanswered questions. And let me just read this because I'm jumping out. So we don't have effective exclusion of minors, number one. Number two, we don't have preservation of adult privacy and anonymity because we do have the right to manage how we interact with society for our own benefit in harmony and in balance with society's interest overall. And then number three, resistance to circumvention. There is no technical means to prevent any age verification or even ID verification from being hacked. You're trying to inhibit, you're trying to limit U.S. citizens who by default do the right thing majority of the time. But then what happens if that U.S. citizen's ID and age gets a copy, is copied and used by other state actors from other countries who now they're going to impersonate you. And now you have committed a crime. You didn't really, but the internet trail shows that you did because some very sophisticated hackers in other countries has now ruined your life because of age verification and later on ID verification that's built into the system so much that you can't possibly prove that you didn't do it. So government ID-based systems are privacy invasive and exclude individuals without standard identification. Estimated at 11% of adults, mostly low income, elderly, and minority, don't even have an ID. They can still vote, but they don't have an ID to use a computer. So you want people to learn AI. You want people to start writing code, maybe, still, kind of, sort of. You want people to do digital. You want people to go from, being in prison to learning computers on some level. Or you just want people from low income and disenfranchised communities to adopt computer tools and all this great stuff, right? And then so you're going to say, oh, you need to start using computers, but they can't get an ID, or they have all these issues with their ID or the ability to get an ID. Oh, and then your Facebook and you're trying to sell Facebook to 1 billion people over in Africa, right? You're setting up data centers in Africa. You're trying to do all this stuff in Africa, and they don't have age and ID verification systems in the 54 countries of Africa. So you're going to have a version of Facebook in the United States, right? That is, whatever. And I know Facebook Meta doesn't make operating systems per se, but they would be involved in this. So now, you got all kinds of weird issues there. And so anyway, facial age estimation is unreliable. It's biased against people of color and trivially defeatable, right? Credit card verification excludes people that don't have a bank account and creates financial surveillance records. I thought your relationship with your bank was supposed to be private. It's not. So device level or operating system level verification, as proposed in some recent legislation, effectively creates a national ID infrastructure that has been repeatedly rejected by the American public and political establishment. And this whole discussion just made me remember something. This was actually attempted and discussed not in the internet era. It was discussed in the Reagan era. Yes, back then, even back then, there was talk and discussion about a national ID. And there was a huge backlash against that idea. So that actually means that national ID has been on the agenda for about 40, maybe 50 years. 40 or 50 years. So this is a long-term back and forth. This is a tension between some parts of government and society in general. So this is a long-term thing that's going on. So even if this somehow goes away this year because of political advocacy, lobbying, effective overturning of these laws shown to be both unconstitutional, not really able to implement from a technical standpoint that is reliable, and from a standpoint of preserving the rights of the people who are unduly inconvenienced by this. Even then, this is a long-term thing that society in America will be continuing with for the next couple of decades, if not 100 years. So, circumvention and security theater. Oh, my favorite topic. Any age verification system that can be circumvented by a technically literate teenager. Oh, those little hackers from which we all came who work in computers, right? Look, Google came from some folks that liked computers when they were young. Linux came from some young dude who liked computers when he was young. Yeah, they all went to college and studied computer science or whatever and all this good stuff, but they always had this interest. Bill Gates was into computers when he was young, right? And you can go on and on and on. There's so many advances that has happened with computers and what we have now from the standpoint of people who started young or started making contributions when they were real young, many of which before the age of 18. So if we had these laws then, we wouldn't have what we have now, which is cell phones, computers, laptops, mobile devices, you name it. So anyway, the little teenagers are going to find a way, and they're going to borrow somebody else's age and ID, and then so on and so forth. Parents can't stop them. The kids are kids, right? Browser-based workarounds. They're going to find a way to use Google Chrome, Firefox, Edge, whatever, and they're going to know how to get in there and do their thing and make themselves be 28 and from some other place, or simply migrating to non-compliant platforms hosted outside of U.S. jurisdictions, right? So they'll use VPN, and they'll use, even if, you outlaw VPN, they'll find some other thing. Maybe they'll invent something. And they're all of a sudden technically found a way from a computer in the US, they now know how to actually be a computer in some other part of the world. It's an established technique. So I'm not disclosing anything brand new that nobody hasn't already thought about, or that has been used by a variety of what they call state actors to, do things. I mean, that's what Sony found out, right? Anyway, so all of this just fails, right? The result is not child protection, but security theater. One of the things that I most dislike in the computer world, one of the things I dislike the most. That's why I have been against antivirus software, right? So much security theater. The idea that the computer is secure. The idea that you actually have some real protection on the computer. So I have a 3-hour video that goes into my point of view. I know it's boring and all this good stuff, but I've looked at this, both intuitively and as a professional for more than 20 years. The computer itself, even Apple, but Apple is really good, but the computer itself is not fundamentally secure the way you can secure a building in the physical world. It is not the same. Computers, by their very design, being entities of electricity, you cannot hide electricity. You cannot hide the radiation. Since you cannot hide the radiation emanating from computer circuits, there will always be a way to identify and influence what's going on with that computer. There's all kinds of techniques, right? And that's why the military used to have this program called TEMPEST, right? Tempest. A understanding and an awareness of the ways a computer can be compromised, even if it's not connected to the internet. And that has not changed, right? So anyway, it's all just for show. And this all happens at the cost of real safety, at the cost of real privacy and real liberty for law-abiding citizens. This dynamic is well understood in the cybersecurity community and has been documented repeatedly in many regulatory contexts. For example, the ineffectiveness of age blockades gates for alcohol and tobacco websites. So, the disproportionate burden on small software developers and open source projects. Compliance with age verification mandates require significant engineering resources, legal counsel, and ongoing operational costs. Let me pause right there. So, once again, and I have a whole blog article series from way back when on a whole different topic I will not bring up here because it will just get real crazy real quick. But there has been these movements in corporate America and in some cases government and other areas of society. There has been these movements that have had the end result of making software developers of various stripes afraid to even build software. And the fears have been reasonable. And I'm not going to bring up these past things because, like I said, it'll get real crazy and real messy and probably real nasty real quick. So we'll leave all that in the past. But there has been some actual things that have happened that have required court cases in the last 20 years to maintain the freedom of software developers. Whew. And it's like, man, every time you turn around and you want to invent, you want to innovate, you want to take your ideas and express in some form, it's like, oh boy, look over your shoulder. Damn, if you're not going to end up in court, and you're going to have to just be like, man, do I risk it, or I just stop writing code? I just stop writing code forever. And it has a chilling effect on software developers for real. And it can slow you down. You might wait 5 years, 10 years to see if the dust settles. And then you're like, well, let me see. Okay, that's a favorable court decision. I guess I can start again. And so these are the background things that slow down innovation. These are the things behind the scenes where if you are a regular person that don't write software and don't like make technology, but you're wondering, why is our technology so behind? Why don't we have the Jetsons? Why don't we have Star Trek? Why don't we even have some of the more refined aspects of Star Wars, right? Because many of these things we could create. We just don't create them at the pace, speed, scale, scope, and detail that we could, because we got all this weird stuff that goes on in technology, from corporations that buy out factory capacity and say the only operating system you're going to install on these computers is mine. And if you install anybody else's operating system on these computers, you're going to pay a lot of money, right? Because you're still under contract with us. Just all kinds of weird stuff in U.S. history with technology and laws and weird stuff that just simply slowed people down, pushed people out of the industry, and caused us to be the equivalent of a galactic technical backwater for the foreseeable century. And then you have your competitors, in other countries now catching up, and in some cases leapfrogging, all because you don't have the conducive environment that you once did to allow engineers, innovators, and other creative types in the digital space and outside the digital space to flourish and be at their best. So that's the chilling effect of a lot of this, right? And so you not only have to put in place significant technical resources, right? Engineering resources, right? Compliance framework. There might be a compliance framework for the age verification. You're like, a compliance framework? I just want to write a screen and put it on. I just want to write some code and put a screen put a screen on a screen, right? We call that visual part that you can actually touch and click and all that, call that a screen. I want to put a screen on a screen, but no, right? You gotta find you a lawyer. You got to invest in some auditing. You got to do all of this, blah, blah, blah. And big companies like Meta, Google, Apple, Microsoft, they can actually afford all of that, right? They're already well positioned for all of that. So now you're going to short circuit the expansion of small business in the United States for the benefit of these big companies. I know they've convinced a lot of people that AI is the future and that AI can run all this stuff. It is a lie. We can prove it. It is not what they say it is and what they've made you think it is. Not at all. So maybe I should dig into that in another video, in a way different than what I have done in the past, because I do have some new information. But the thing of it is that these companies are not the innovation of the United States. These are big companies that historically have purchased smaller companies that are the innovators. They do it all the time. You think that you would think that Google, Facebook, look, let's just knock them down one at a time. Meta, Facebook, Oculus. Facebook didn't create Oculus. That was some independent software developer from Texas who created all that stuff, and Facebook bought them. So Facebook didn't create that, right? Okay, so Google, right? They buy companies all the time, little smaller companies all the time, for some of their things like, self-driving cars, or, just all kinds of little different things. They did not create the engine for Google Chrome. That came from Apple, right? Apple didn't actually create Mac OS the way it originally was. That came from Berkeley Software Distribution. It was free software. Scott Forstall, vice president of software, maybe at Next, but definitely at Apple, he said, hey, let's use this thing called BSD. So Apple didn't invent the foundations of their operating system in that way, okay? Microsoft, they did not invent Microsoft DOS. They bought it from a dude so that they could have a contract with IBM back in the day. They purchased the software code for Visual Basic, the original Visual Basic. They purchased a web development tool called Front Page, or the precursor for that. They purchased the technology for SQL Server, which is now Azure SQL. So these companies, they have bought a lot of these technologies that they then, they came from smaller players. And they buy people. My beloved Microsoft.NET software development framework. Microsoft hired Anders Heidelsberg, the creator of Turbo Pascal and Borland. And the thing about it is Anders Heidelsberg, super talented, built one of the most powerful programming technologies before he even came over to Microsoft. Microsoft said, yeah, that's the dude. Let's go ahead and hire him. And now you got C# and .NET. And now .NET can run on Linux, right? Well, there's a talented developer. I think he's from Brazil, Miguel de Icaza. He led the team that created a Linux version of .NET before Microsoft even had such a thing. So they said, let's hire this dude. This dude can help us make .NET run on Mac and all these other places. So a lot of this stuff, the background innovation is the small businesses and this individual technologists tinkering away by themselves or with some buddies over the internet to make these things happen. And just because we got these big platforms now that billions of people are on and all of this, doesn't mean that that's the beginning and end of innovation. In fact, that is now what you see with Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and all of them. That is simply an ending point of past innovation, right? They're now big and they may not have too many songs left in the future. The future is the smaller folk. There's a guy named Chris Latner. He has a programming language that, from what I hear from him, is going to smoke all of those folks, man. So, and anyway, so moving on, the thing is that small developers, independent publishers, open source projects, and nonprofit educational platforms face existential threats. Ooh, that's such a word, right? An ominous word, existential threat. But it's a threat to the existence of many of these groups, right? The result is regulatory capture, right? Again, these are words you hear all the time, but think about their etymological components. You're threatening somebody's existence, and you're trying to capture somebody through regulations, right? The law, ostensibly designed to protect children, in practice consolidates and creates monopolies among those big companies I told you about before. And they are the least motivated to change their business models. I like those companies. I just think that we need to maintain an environment where all the rest of us can do our thing unencumbered by security theater and practices that makes life completely horrendous, to the extent that many of us would have to give up our life's work, or would rather give up our life's work than fall victim, prey, or subject to the worst aspects of improperly reasoned and improperly developed regulation. So what is the historical trajectory of jurisprudence in this case? Or the historical and jurisprudential trajectory? The Supreme Court's trajectory from Reno versus ACLU through Ashcroft versus ACLU. So maybe we have two former attorneys generals, either in the future or before they took on those roles, and take on these issues, to Brown versus Emma. And the ongoing net choice litigation reveals a consistent pattern. The court is willing to recognize the state's interest in protecting children, but it demands narrow tailoring, rejects overbroad prophylactic measures, and insists that the burden of proof lies with the government to demonstrate that no less restrictive alternative exists. Every major age gating statute that has reached the Supreme Court has been struck down or substantially narrowed. The current generation of age verification laws, while politically popular, faces the same doctrinal gauntlet. The most probable outcome is that the Supreme Court, if and when it addresses a mature age verification mandate on the merits, will apply strict scrutiny to content-based verification requirements and intermediate scrutiny to content-neutral ones, and will find most current statutory schemes insufficiently tailored to survive either standard. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I have another part here where we look at the case in favor of age verification for a balanced picture. To the extent that I have time to cover that in a follow-up, I will, but I wanted to start out with the case against age verification, because that is something that there has been less discussion about at the legislative level, right? Yeah, there's internet discussion about it, but at a legislative level, there hasn't been sufficient and thorough airing, A-I-R-I-N-G, airing of these issues from a variety of viewpoints, particularly those that would be most harmed by the implementation of these regulatory schemes. And so we need to understand that, because as I've always said, even beyond this, right, because I have a long history through my writings on my blogs of discussing these matters. I have over 10 plus years of writings on this. Not about age verification, but similar things, right? And the common thread is that is a couple of things. Number one, these laws do not do the things that they are stated to accomplish at the outset, right? And there is an attempt to try to control technology and the use of technology through law, and the evolving nature of technology, the way it changes, both in a linear, structured way, but in an organic way, makes it one of the most, the least susceptible to regulation. And that is a good thing, right? Because there is a strong alignment between technology and mathematics. And we don't really, and I say really with some caveat, we don't really have laws against mathematics now, do we? Right? It has been a tradition in this country that you cannot patent mathematics. Now, I know there's been some regulatory changes in that area so that some mathematics are considered, weapons. That's still up for debate. But the thing of it is that when it comes to things like technology, art, things that we create, things that allow us to express ourselves, both as a society, as engineers, that we have the liberal right to pursue those, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it is with that understanding, it is with that exposure to civics, right? Me, like many citizens in the United States, hey, you put us through school, you taught us these things, so this is how we respond. If you don't want us to have a discussion about this, don't teach it to us, right? But I came of a generation where I was thoroughly, to the edge of boredom, you might say, but I paid attention, but thoroughly educated on civics, law, the government, its foundations, all of this from a certain point of view, right? And that's the view that I express here because not only did I receive that education, but I understood it and I see it. And I see where if you don't have these things, that you have a more worse off society than you do today with all the things that are going on. And that if we are to make correction, it is a correction more in alignment with those higher virtues expressed in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, right? And others. So with that, I will catch you on the next one, and I will see you soon.